Hi there. Today we're going to talk about this here clone helmet in 1/6 scale. I'll cover a few things, the LED feature, the paint effects that I put on here. This is of course for my good friend Darren over in the United Kingdom, who came up with a really good idea for the paint, by the way, and the weathering. He said add some scratches in there. Showed me some pictures of different 1/6 scale clone armors that not only had the chipping and the brush weathering and the washes, but they also had some scratches put in there, which I hadn't really considered doing really minute little scratching details. But I have to tell you, Darren, you had a really good idea there because this looks like $1,000,000. So let's talk about the paint. This is painted in what is described as a flat black, although it looks more like a satin black to me, and that is a Tamiya rattle can or aerosol paint. It's a lacquer-based paint, so it dries quickly and it forms a really, really hard finish after it dries. So I put on 3 coats of the black lacquer. I then went ahead and used my Tamiya acrylic paints that come in a bottle. I buy a white bottle and I buy a black bottle to do all of my gray paint. And the reason I don't buy gray paints is because they're either warm or cool grays, or they have a little bit of blue, a little bit of red. That'd be making it a cooler or warm gray. I'd rather just be able to mix my own grays. So I mixed up 2 different colors of gray for this helmet, did dry brush weathering on all of the surface details. I then went in with my watercolor pencil, my gray watercolor pencil, and did this chipping and scratching. And my last paint wash was to go in with my flat black Tamiya acrylic, where you can see there's some places where I added flat black to add some contrast. And then of course you have the natural gloss black, sort of obsidian finish of the visor itself. Lastly, this was sealed with 2 coats of the Tamiya clear lacquer, and it's a satin or a flat lacquer. It's sort of like dull coat, the stuff that testers put out. That's like toxic as all get out and almost impossible to find now, unfortunately. But I would say that the Tamiya lacquer matte finish is a very good substitute. Okay, so we've covered the paint. Now let's talk about the LED features. The individual who prints these out, I really have to give him kudos. As a 1/6 scale designer and tinkerer myself, I can look at this and really appreciate the work that he did, not only in the 3D printing process and the design that went into that, into the helmet, the ball cup where everything's located. I have to give him snaps for the LED function as well, with one provision, and I'll get to that here in a moment. But first, let's look at this LED feature, the mechanics of it. We have a battery compartment here. We have a stack of coin cell batteries. I'm not sure what size they are, but if you were to peel this back to access the batteries, they undoubtedly would either be laser printed or laser etched or just pad stamp printed with the type of battery, the size, the voltage, and different metrics for the battery, so you'd know which one to buy to replace it. Here in the States, I don't know what it's like in the United Kingdom, but here in the States you can find batteries like this in different drugstores. And undoubtedly, wherever you are in the world, you can find them online. So we have the batteries. We have these very stiff wires which lead to the LED housed within the visor. The visor is a very thick piece of plastic. We'll look at the LED light here in a moment. But let's talk about this switch housing. So we have a 2-position switch with 3 leads on the bottom. A nice little detent for on and off. The problem is this thing is not affixed to anything, so it's just floating around in there. Because of that, the other helmet that I had that I painted for Darren, which I painted in the Gregor paint scheme, one of the wires came loose when I tried to turn it on. I looked on the bottom of the switch as I lifted it out of there. You can lift it out about a 1/2 inch. And I could see that there was a very small bead of solder, so we had a point of failure with one of the wires, the lead wire in this case. So I resoldered it with a nice big chunk of solder, so it's bomb-proof at this point. This one is soldered really well, so I don't think there's going to be any potential problems there. The problem, however, is this floating switch. This is not affixed to anything, so ostensibly the idea here was with this design, I imagine, I don't want to read into it too much, but the guy who designed it undoubtedly put this here so that it could be actuated without having to remove the helmet from the actual figure itself. However, even if this were affixed in place and was completely, thoroughly, sturdily, if it was sturdily put in place, you still would have a lot of trouble accessing it because the upper chest armor, and particularly the shoulder pauldron, there's very little clearance, just enough to squeeze these in there. And of course, you're not going to be able to turn it on and off because the design is such that the bloody switch moves around. So, what is our workaround? The workaround is to pop the helmet on and off when you want to activate or deactivate the switch. And I know that sounds like a humongous pain in the ass, but you have to bear in mind that this ball socket, while it is tight enough and has enough of a friction fit to allow this to be posed and to stay in its pose, and there's decent articulation, it is loose enough of a fit to be able to pop this off quite easily. Very little pressure to pull it off. Just, stabilize the figure at the upper chest and then just pull it off. Then these mosquitoes, these forceps here with the slight bend, which I'm going to send these to you, Darren, so you have them to do this with. The best way to do this, since this has a nice little detent, is to go ahead and take these, put them against the top surface of the switch, put a little bit of a bias, about 5 degrees, 10 degrees of bias, so your leading edge of your forcep is against the housing. You can see it's moving here. Your trailing edge is then going to contact the switch. Like that, a slight pinch, and the light is on. Nice detent, pops in place very securely, and we can see the output is really something. And there's a nice fade here as well, which I really appreciate. And even in this direct light, you can see that there's still a lot of output from that LED. So let's deactivate it. We're just going to reverse the action of activation. This time our trailing edge of our forcep will contact the housing and the leading edge will contact the switch. Very slight pinch, and you could actually hear it popping in place there. Activate and deactivate. I'm having a little bit of trouble here because I'm trying to watch it through a shutter. Activate, deactivate. Pop it on and off. Do it one more time. Activate and deactivate. So, what would I say to the guy who designed these? Good job, number one. Number two, I had a little idea about how to fix this. In the future, I imagine you could probably go into your program. You probably have this file already stored in there. I would build up a little berm of plastic on each side of this switch to keep it from floating back and forth. And grab the forceps one more time here. Basically, it would be a staple-shaped matrix of plastic around this, so it can't push forward and it can't push back. To keep it from sliding out this direction toward the inside part of the helmet where the pivot is, I would put a little bit of a lip on the plastic. I can't imagine that that would be too hard to design into this. The other possibility, and this would be an interesting consideration, would be to make a cut along the scribe line right here and have the cut be just wide enough to have the on-off action of the switch, and then turn this switch housing so that the switch faces outward. I imagine that's probably about a 5mm post on that switch right there. Taking into consideration the thickness of the helmet, that would give you about 1.5 millimeters of surface where the switch would be. It'd barely be visible, which is nice because it'd integrate nicely into the features of the helmet. You could then just slide your finger back and forth to turn it off. But it, of course, would have to be affixed this direction so that the switch wouldn't push out when you pushed against it. Just an idea for the future. I also considered to try to make this thing stay in one place. I thought about using CA or cyanoacrylate glue, super glue, crazy glue, to affix this to the side of the helmet. However, attaching metal to plastic is tricky. And also, even if this were plastic to plastic, I'm not sure that it would hold up to more than 1 or 2 activations and deactivations before it would break loose. The other idea was to just lay in a bunch of 2-part epoxy to try to anchor this thing in place. But I realized in doing that, I would be epoxying over the leads, which would cause a problem in case you ever had to redo one of the soldering joints. So yeah, the epoxy wouldn't work well that way. It also would potentially inhibit the mechanical function of the switch, and would undoubtedly goop up this battery compartment. So even with the most precision surgical application of epoxy, I just don't think you'd be able to epoxy this to the side of the helmet. So we're going to work with it the way that it was designed to be worked with a workaround provision, which is the on and off via the forceps. I think I ran the helmet out of the frame there. On and off via the forceps. So I'm really stoked with how this turned out. Darren, great idea to add the scratching. It just really looks the part. My next video will of course show this guy put on the figure, and you'll see all the other armor and everything put together. And yeah, pretty happy with how it turned out. So thanks for watching the video. This will of course be featured on YouTube as well. I invite anybody who's watching this to become a subscriber to my channel by activating the switches and buttons that you have to do to be a subscriber. So thanks for watching, and until the next time, Michael Andrew Scram II signing off.